You sing it with us. We'll give you the words. When I was walking that ribbon of highway,
as I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me and the skyway.
There is no national conspiracy to buy elections and control America. Now talk about
this land was made for you and me.
Open Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go on.
I'm sure they are. I don't know.
1970s official declassified program how the CIA infiltrated the mainstream media from the higher ups.
Right.
It's declassified.
The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets, and they own all the big all the big media companies. So they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right.
I am of the opinion we live in a matrix, a complex system strategically designed to imprison the minds of the inhabitants therein, to bar them from the truth of the real world and how it functions. Such a system, as it were, is multifaceted and multidimensional, meaning there are multiple layers and a labyrinth of devices used to keep this system of control perpetual in imprisoning minds. One of these devices used is the illusion of choice. What better way to control a mass population and influence public opinion than to grant them the illusion that their choices matter, or at least that they really even have a choice to begin with. But first of all, what is choice, and how do you define it? Choice, put simply, is the act by which we have the ability to select something or make a decision when two or more possibilities present themselves. What will you eat? What will you drink? What will you wear? Who will you vote for? These are questions that warrant inevitable choices to be made. From the minute and trivial to the big and drastic, choices are what govern the outcomes of our lives. I am also of the opinion that democracy is dead. In fact, it has been for quite some time. I mean, come on. A government ruled by the people, for the people, in this modern day of corporate billionaires is laughable to say the least. I believe these billion-dollar corporations enforce the illusion of choice we have, given how much they own and control. And you best believe that when a group of extremely powerful people share common interests, those interests usually tend to usurp the power of the majority. Such powers do not have the best interest of the people, nor in our individual, emphasis on the word individual, freedom of thought, choice, or any other inalienable right we humans are born with. It simply doesn't benefit them. Their aim is total control. But control of what exactly, and for what purpose? Simply because they can? Because it's human nature to be greedy? Or is there some other grander purpose? In any case, the construction of the illusion of choice has been made, and it's up to the individual if they wish to see reality as such. To date, 6 extremely rich and powerful media companies control 90% of what the American public sees and hears. These 6 multi-billion-dollar media conglomerates are known formally as the Big Six. They consist of AT&T, Comcast, ViacomCBS, Fox, and the renowned Disney and Sony corporations. It is worth noting that the definition of the term media does not just consist of, or is limited to, the meaning of simply being a news outlet. Media can be defined as, in its truest sense, the means of communication, such as radio, television, newspapers, magazines, and the internet, that reach or influence people widely. Upon closer examination of the word, we see it derives itself from its Latin plural form, medium, meaning middle ground or intermediate. Suffice to say, news channels, streaming services, motion picture studios, book publishing companies, radio stations, etc. are all, quote, middle grounds a corporation uses to communicate with its audience. And also, such media is the intermediary by which a corporation's audience is influenced. Media outlets today, in aggregate, construct the 6 multi-billion-dollar monopolies that have control over 90% of what we see and hear. Such media outlets converging under a few media conglomerates is a most important aspect of media consolidation. Take, for example, Disney, the highly renowned and beloved corporation that has made itself a household name, owns popular movie studios such as Marvel, Pixar, and Lucasfilms, to well-known TV channels such as A&E, the History Channel, and Lifetime. This same megacorporation also owns the ABC News Channel.
Why would Disney want this particular deal to go through?
Well, Disney has its eye on all of the entertainment that Fox makes. It has its eye on the stake in Sky of the UK. Fox owns 39% of that. It owns a movie studio, it owns cable TV networks. It has a studio that makes big movie franchises like Avatar and X-Men. We'll get all of that if the deal goes through, and it'll mean that Disney has a much broader, bigger global offering that it can sell to people around the world, wherever they are, and they'll be able to watch Disney entertainment on a streaming service which Disney is about to launch.
This same pattern of holding entertainment companies in one hand and news outlets in the other is common, as other such companies like AT&T, who own Cartoon Network, DreamWorks, and Universal, also own the Democratic news network CNN. And likewise with Fox, who on one hand owns the Fox Sports Network, on the other hand also own the conservative news network named Fox. And these are just 3 corporations, with just barely a fraction of their subsidiaries listed. Keep in mind, their subsidiaries have subsidiaries, which amount to the list becoming rather exhaustive, but nonetheless, the consolidation of media assets among the Big 6 make them some of the wealthiest corporations to ever exist in the history of mankind. And while this may seem like a neutral thing, the fact of the matter is that people underestimate the effects of media assets being concentrated.
Ignorance is bliss.
Because of this concentration, these many diverse companies and all media assets therein become of one mind, one body, one opinion that speak for the public, with very few independent media corporations to actually represent that public. That is, until they're bought out by one of the conglomerates. This kind of disproportionality, by where 6 media corporations own all that we see and hear, has since helped construct the illusion of choice, made the public voice near obsolete, and continuously, through corporate lobbying, influenced so-called political powers in favor of laws that would only continue to benefit them. It's a pretty bad situation altogether, but it wasn't always this way. In 1983, there were 50 companies that had control over the media, compared to today's minuscule 6. So what happened, and how did we get here?
This historic legislation, in my way of thinking, really embodies what we ought to be about as a country and what we ought to be about in this city. It clearly enables the age of possibility in America to expand, to include more Americans.
On the fateful day, February 8th, 1996, people wouldn't be ready for what was about to be history in the making. Former President Bill Clinton stands over a table, head cocked, electronic pen in hand, with the former Vice President Al Gore standing at his side as he begins to sign an act that would alter and forever shape the media world as we know it today. And not for the better. The act that this former puppet signed was the Telecommunications Act of 1996. This act would essentially deregulate and greatly unclasp the previous tight restrictions the FCC had on media concentration and cross-ownership laws. For instance, one of the changes to this act would raise the national ownership caps for broadcasting companies to own up to 35% of the national audience. This means broadcasting companies could now own up to as many TV stations as they so desired, as long as it doesn't exceed the 35% cap. Along with this, media companies were also granted the ability to expand its control into other media sectors. This highly contentious and disputed act would pave the way for the current modern-day media consolidation, being under control by just 6 companies. Also, it is paramount in understanding that the Telecommunications Act of 1996 was a great reform from the previous Telecommunications Act of 1934. As I said, the Act of 1996 had deregulated and unfastened the previous tight restrictions. The restrictions on broadcasting and newspaper companies enforced by the government in 1934, among other things, was to ensure diversity among a manifold of different voices who could produce and report on information that would be in the interest of the public. This idea of media diversity was to be a direct reflection of the First Amendment right, freedom of speech, and more specifically, the press. Media companies providing a platform where diverse viewpoints could gain exposure and be expressed freely would truly be an ideal country whose people hold democracy as sovereign. Such an environment would naturally encourage true journalism, for example, to be commonplace. It would also give people actual choices in what they heard, read, and saw, because these independent organizations would be in the interest of their communities, reporting or talking about things that mattered. Along with this, people could openly criticize or speak on controversial subjects about their government without needing to worry about omitting information, say in newspapers or reports, or not being able to publish it altogether because of its contentious content. At any rate, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 would virtually eliminate this, leading to a more media-concentrated world where corporations control our choices by giving us no choice. Our choices are their choices, and to deviate from this or to produce content apart or in direct conflict with the narrative is unacceptable and unwanted. But what content would need to be produced for it to be considered unwanted or unacceptable?
The State Patrol of Minnesota has asked us to get on the ground. We are covering what was a very peaceful protest. The State Patrol pulled up immediately and started shooting tear gas. We're pressed, sir. You're pressed? Pressed. Go inside! Stand up. Put your hands behind your back.
Who are they aiming that at?
Nice shooting at the photographer.
At us, like directly at us. Directly.
Why are they doing that?
They're shooting at our crew.
I don't
Do
know.
they not know that obviously they see the camera?
Get going! Go!
Where do I go? I'm with WCCO.
Get out of here! Come on! Get out! Run your wreck!
Press! Press! I'm press! I am press.
I don't care. Get down.
Okay, I'm down. I'm down. I am press. Please. I was just sprayed in the face with pepper spray.
A book titled Freedom of the Press by Andrew Carpin, he writes, and Disney recently provoked an uproar when it prevented its subsidiary Miramax from distributing Michael Moore's film Fahrenheit 9/11. As a senior Disney executive told the New York Times, it's not in the interest of any corporation to be dragged into a highly charged partisan political battle. Follow the logic, and you can see what lies ahead. If the only media companies are major corporations, controversial and dissenting views may not be aired at all. And he isn't wrong. Media corporations having something controversial plastered to their forehead is not a good look for them, as they could lose viewership and ultimately money. And while that's understandable, that's precisely the problem. As he said, our media companies by which we gain information are corporations, and they dare tread views and topics that would prove to be too controversial. But what if such controversiality was in the best interest of the people?
get you on the record on this question. In the White House view, there's no ethical conflict in former President Bush and former Secretary of State Jim Baker using their contacts with world leaders to represent one of the most well-known military arms dealers, the Carlyle Group.
The President has full faith that his family will conform with all proper all ethics laws, and will act properly in their conduct.
Okay, so let's say one group of people, like the American people, pay you $400,000 a year to be President of the United States. But then another group of people invest in you, your friends, and their related businesses $1.4 billion over a number of years. Who are you going to like? Who's your daddy? Because that's how much the Saudi royals and their associates have given the Bush family.
Morning, everybody. Oh, we know
Their friends.
How are you, sir?
And their related businesses in the past 3 decades.
Seems like a very nice reunion with friends.
Is it rude to suggest that when the Bush family wakes up in the morning, they might be thinking about what's best for the Saudis instead of what's best for you or me?
For those of you unfamiliar, Michael Moore's film, Fahrenheit 9/11, is a documentary film utilizing the powerful likes of investigative journalism to question the Bush administration's true intentions regarding the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In this film, Moore covers the secret ties of the Bush family to the Bin Laden family, the Saudi Arabian government, and the Taliban, as well as Bush's manipulation of the mainstream media to gain widespread support for the war. Moore essentially, in so many words, illustrates that the war the US engaged in was based on a lie, and that because of this lie, it caused a trickle effect of subsequent atrocities to occur for those citizens of the Middle East and the US soldiers who were tortured and killed. I am of the opinion, upon examination of the contents of this film, we have insight as to what media corporations deem as unacceptable or unwanted. The answer is simply truth. Michael Moore created a film by which he shows the true nature of our government, one that hasn't any interest in you or me, but rather holds the interest of power and money, even if it means gaining these assets through illegal and violent means at the expense of human rights and human life.
What are those people gonna do? All the elevators are blocked out.
I'm on the 83rd floor. I'm gonna die, aren't I? No. I'm gonna die. Live, say your prayers. We're gonna think positive because you gotta help each other get off the floor. I'm gonna die.
A new type of war. That's what it is.
Most of you, who are at least over the age of 25 or 30, can more than likely remember the exact place you were or what you were doing the exact moment you found out the Twin Towers had been hit. A most traumatic day, where the lives of many people had been lost, families mourning the loss of dead loved ones, and a country in emotional ruin from the devastation the brutal attacks left in its wake. But then strolls in this filmmaker, who creates a documentary where he explains the Bush administration, our own government, exploited the 9/11 attacks to only fulfill the corrupt ambitions of wealthy people. He's not allowed to do that. That goes against the narrative. And yes, there is a narrative. But if we live in a democratic society where freedom of the press is held sovereign, then there shouldn't be a narrative. And people such as Michael Moore should be able to use the media as a way to openly criticize and question the government. But Disney and the other wealthy Big Five aren't the press, they're corporations who control the press. Various news stations and papers, but they all say the same thing, just talking heads, repeating ad nauseum the news they want us to hear and giving us the entertainment that they want us to see. And it's not like these media corporations are lone entities who work independently of each other with isolated interests. A study done in 2003 by Aaron Moore, published in the Columbia Journalism Review, found that at the time, the multi-billion-dollar media conglomerates News Corp, Viacom, Disney, and Time Warner shared 45 interlocking directors. And in 2004, they shared 141 joint ventures. This is indicative that these corporations are more or less business partners. In his book, The New Media Monopoly, by the late renowned independent journalist Ben H. Bagdikian, he writes, "It is a more significant cooperation that closely intertwines all five into a mutual aid combine. To cite only one example, News Corporation shares a financial interest with its, quote, competitors in 63 cable systems, magazines, recording companies, and satellite channels in the United States and abroad. All five join forces in one of Washington's most powerful lobbies, the National Association of Broadcasters, to achieve the laws and regulations that increase their collective powers over consumers. In 2000, for example, the National Association of Broadcasters spent $2.5 million lobbying on communications issues, and that year made 64% of its campaign contributions to Republicans and 36% to Democrats. This is in addition to the lobbying and campaign money spent by the major media corporations on their own. The interconnectivity of media conglomerates generate common interests, I believe, both on the individual level per corporation and also to the corporations themselves. These interconnected media corporations invest in other businesses and share joint ventures, which only make them grow larger and larger until their presence is ubiquitous and unavoidable. Consequently, with this amount of connectivity going on between these supposed competitors, this means very little difference in the news that is reported, and also very little creativity among scripts written, for example.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
Who are you really shopping for this holiday season? It's okay, you can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Well, it's okay, you can admit it if you have bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it. You've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarmingly, some media outlets publish things that simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
We're not just at the 11th hour, we're at the 11th hour 59-minute point in this country constitutionally. I'm sorry to say that we are living under a post-constitutional government in America now, and it's getting worse by the hour. There's a war going on in Washington. I'll talk about some of that tonight. I take a bit of a risk in doing this every time I do it, and we've been living this for about 4 years, but it has to be done, because this is so important what we're up against in this country.
Kevin Shipp is an ex-CIA officer who now dedicates his life to exposing the deep state and shadow government at the risk of his life. I actually stumbled across him a couple years ago, and he's definitely someone worth watching in order to learn more about this corrupt system. One of the things that he talks about within this video is the CIA's involvement within the mainstream media.
This is the size. Each organization that I'm about to show you up here functions in secrecy and is bound by secret oaths from saying anything about what they see. When I was in there, I was in there during the Iran-Contra scandal and some other things, and you cannot talk about anything that you see, even if it's illegal or unconstitutional, because there's a system to systematically destroy you if you do. You remember the Council on Foreign Relations, established in 1921? Came largely from the banking elite, the Morgans, the Rothschilds, and others, formed the Council on Foreign Relations. Council on Foreign Relations, eventually with the same members of the CFR, created the CIA. I think 21 CIA directors have all been members of the Council on Foreign Relations. That is an unconstitutional organization, and it has been since its founding in 1921. The Council on Foreign Relations in the beginning and the CIA had a direct established contract with the mainstream media. Philip and Catherine Graham of the Washington Post
were members of the Council on Foreign Relations and directly connected to the CIA and directly connected to the CI and CFR's program of pumping information into the news media for propaganda of the American people. And do you think that still continues today? There's no doubt about it. I will prove it later on. Most people will say, that passed away in 1976 with the end of Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird did not end. A lot of you shaking your heads, you know what I'm talking about. It's still here. Mainstream media is involved directly.
And while I established that there are 6 media corporations that filter what we are allowed to see, 90% of it, it is the CIA who, through Operation Mockingbird, spread propaganda into the mainstream news for the purpose of mind control. I did a video on this some time ago actually, explaining it. Strangely enough, all the criticism that the Warren Commission was receiving for the Warren Report was actually capturing the attention of none other than the CIA. One might ask why the CIA even cared about the criticisms that people were concerned about when it came to the Warren Commission's findings. The CIA would produce their own document titled Countering Criticisms of the Warren Report, or otherwise known as Document 1035-960. In this document, they seem to stress and outline their concerns about people asking questions concerning the Warren Report. Even stranger and more suspicious about Document 1035-960 is that it doesn't seem to just focus and imply that the CIA was only interested in the concerns only, but it seems that this document had an action statement to it, as it is implied that people who seem to question the official narrative of things were onto some kind of conspiracy. The CIA outlines in their first paragraph titled, Our Concern. Various writers have now had the time to scan the Commission's published report and documents for new pretexts for questioning, and there has been a new wave of books and articles criticizing the Commission's findings. In most cases, the critics have speculated as to the existence of some kind of conspiracy. It isn't until the near end of the second paragraph of Document 1035-960 that the CIA makes very clear what their goal is, which is to, quote, provide material for countering and discrediting the claims of conspiracy theorists. So basically, where the discussion wasn't taking place, the CIA didn't have to do anything because they didn't feel threatened. But it's where the discussion was taking place. They even outline this in the third paragraph titled Action. So to what degree and length did the CIA really go to using these propaganda tactics? And were these propaganda tactics even legal? Some of the tactics that they use include the following. To discuss the publicity of liaison and friendly elite contacts, especially politicians and editors, pointing out that the Warren Commission made as thorough investigation as humanly possible, and to point out that further speculative discussion only plays into the hands of opposition, and that conspiracy talk appear to be deliberately generated by communist propaganda. There's an interesting term there, and it says friendly elite contacts, specifically and especially editors and politicians. These are the people that are making the news stories. These are the people that are passing the laws. These are the people in positions of power. When you have people in positions of power and the CIA is essentially leaking information to them, they say, hey, use this information, tell them that the Warren Commission did the best job as humanly possible and that there isn't anything wrong. People who are basically suggesting otherwise are pretty much in favor of the enemy. In this case, specifically in the 1960s, given the background, we know that there was a lot of communist propaganda. The main premise here is that they wanted to become friends with elite contacts. They wanted them, their assets, as the CIA calls it in this document, to become close to the politicians, to the editors, to these people in high-ranking positions, so they could put the public in their place and say, hey, the Warren Commission did what they could do, and this is to pretty much diffuse and deflect any type of criticism, that the Warren Report has received, as we already know.
So to go back to the CIA, I think it was completely deliberate that the CIA, which even as early as 1948, that's when the Operation Mockingbird began, when the CIA as an entity realized the importance of the public mind and how important it was to manipulate the public mind and set up a vast program of manipulation. That the very intelligent people, very intelligent but very immoral people working for the CIA, they came to realize that if you have a particularly powerful phrase, that it is, as you've said, like a weapon. And so they ran across this phrase, conspiracy theorist. As I say, it was first used, according to my research, around 1920 by an American author whose name I forget. And they thought, wow, what a tremendous label to pin on anybody who questions the findings of the Warren Commission. And so we do actually have the documentary proof that the CIA sent out these secret communiques to the people they call their assets in the media to begin to use that term, conspiracy theorist, against anybody who was questioning the findings of the Warren Report.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Propaganda, lies, and the spread of misinformation. Among all of these things the CIA was funneling into the mainstream media, they found themselves before what's known as the Church Committee. This committee had an incredibly hard task ahead of them, which was, this committee was responsible for investigating the illegal actions that intelligence agencies may have been up to. These agencies included FBI, the NSA, and obviously the CIA. We see at one of the Church Committee hearings that the CIA was being questioned about their involvement in manipulating the media, as well as politicians. And going back to the question of if their tactics were legal, I think the evidence speaks for itself. These were illegal propaganda tactics to shape and mold a generation to get people to believe whatever the CIA wanted them to believe. The horrific part about all of this, though, was that it dipped into the realm of actual psychological warfare on the American public.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
The CIA has a very dark record, especially when analyzing accounts of horrific documentation of the infamous Operation Paperclip, which recruited Nazi war criminals, specifically Nazi scientists who tortured many during World War II. This operation gave way to unconventional methods of human experimentation that began making its way to America. Who did they test per these experiments? They tested unwitting, innocent American people, the average everyday person, you and me. And the inhumane experimentation of studying the human mind would aid the CIA greatly to engage in a secret war on the home front of America. A war not fought with guns, bombs, or physical weapons, but one fought with lies, propaganda, and deceit for the purpose of mastering mind control.
Evidence of wrong.
I was there for a while, and I thought, I don't want to stay here, and I started to run away from the hospital, and they grabbed me, and then they put me on sleep treatment. And they kept you asleep for 23 days. And while I was asleep, they were shocking the heck out of me with electric shocks and playing tapes.
As well as the experimental drugs and massive electric shock treatments, Mrs. Huard was subjected to psychic driving. Hypnotic-like messages were repeated over and over to a sleeping patient, sometimes for as long as 16 hours in a row. The electric shock treatments were administered on an unprecedented scale. It was called de-patterning. The mind was short-circuited so the psychic driving hypnotic messages could be planted on a clean slate. They were a key part of the mind control experiment. This is how Mrs. Huard remembers one of the messages.
Why Why are you running away from your responsibilities? Why are you running away from your responsibilities? Why are you running away from your responsibilities? Why?
I would try very strongly not to let my mind be capturing all the messages, but they would lower my resistance so much with the heavy drugs, but I couldn't do otherwise than listen.
As you probably know, electroshock treatment has been given for depression for something like 40 years now. It's a very successful and useful treatment for severe depression that doesn't respond to other things. But depatterning is a use of electroshock treatment in a totally different way, in which instead of giving the shocks, say, 2 or 3 times a week, they're given 2 or 3 times a day for 3 or 4 weeks, reducing the patient to a sort of animal, vegetable state, from which it's hoped that they would recover in a more healthy state of mind. It didn't work.
It becomes a scary reality when one realizes that these experiments were conducted over 60 years ago, and the fact that they were successful 60 years ago. So you could imagine the kinds of advancements they've made within a 60-year time frame. Among the ability to weaponize the usage of propaganda tactics, drugs, and electric shock treatment to wipe the mind clean as to enter new information, the document titled The Invisible Third World War highlights the different kinds of warfare used among the military and intelligence agencies. And horrifying enough, the document highlights that the CIA, decades ago, had mastered the ability of another form of mind control, which is the ability to manipulate electromagnetic waves within the atmosphere to be able to manipulate a person's behavior and feelings. And in short, the article horrifyingly concludes that, in fact, the Earth's ionosphere oscillates at approximately the same frequency as the human brain waves, making it a perfect carrier off of which electromagnetic radiations in the brainwave range can be bounced without any change of frequency. The relationship between the electromagnetic sphere and the electromagnetic bases of the human body can be exploited as a strategic weapon. In the beginning of this video, I stated that I believe we live in a complex matrix of sorts that essentially is a prison for your mind, and that one of those facets that constitute the matrix is the illusion of choice. I established that there are 6 major media corporations that help create the illusion of choice in terms of them having a countless number of entertainment and news businesses under their control. And that such media corporations, with their consolidation, is a major threat to freedom of the press and opinion. And ultimately, because these multi-billion-dollar corporations have so much ownership and control, they sway and influence major aspects of the political circle and construct a narrative for the public to believe for the purpose of controlling their emotions and minds. Because of this, true journalism is dead, and those who dare speak out against the narrative are targeted and oppressed. Tie this in with the fact that behind the scenes of it all, the CIA is pulling the strings through their Operation Mockingbird, which is a mass propaganda mind control program weaponized against the public for reasons of control. I don't care who you are from Adam, which side of the political spectrum you're on, or what ethnicity you are, this is a serious and major problem. I don't know about you, but a reality in which a government declares war on its own people through the use of psychological warfare does not sound like a partisan issue to me. So when people say, this is a Republican issue, or this is a liberal issue, you've missed the whole point of the video, and in my honest opinion, you're just being ridiculous. There are ruling powers, the likes of which I haven't even begun to examine in this video, that have ultimate control over the nation of America and the greater parts of the world. And for the ones who would be quick to label me as a conspiracy theorist, it's understandable, and if I were you, I would too. But that is what we call narrative fidelity. When a story that is told, or the facts that are presented, do not fit into a viewer's observation of how the way the world works, or rather, how it is supposed to work, we tend to naturally disregard and dismiss it. and at most times dismiss it through the use of ad hominem attacks at the individual presenting said facts. In the case of Michael Moore's film, it was heavily criticized, and many people hated him for what he presented. But that's just it. We are angry at what we cannot understand. In this matrix we call reality, the only choice we have is to choose to not remain in the illusion. Choice is an illusion, but to remain in that illusion is a choice. And simply, because there is a grander meaning and purpose in this world, one that we cannot understand, does not render such an idea as foolish or absurd. But we are beholden to the ones who cling to such notions and beliefs, which are the very ones who are subject to the system. Welcome to the Matrix Files.